Welcome back. While it was a rocky debate performance for Donald Trump, his allies are hoping one moment might stand out for voters, even though it came at the very end of the night during closing statements. Look.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it, and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in.
Trump allies say it was one of his stronger moments, tying Harris to Biden's time in office and countering her efforts last night to paint herself as a change candidate.
Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris.
forward.
Joining me now on set is my good friend Chuck Todd, NBC News chief political analyst, Molly Ball, senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Harris, and Mike Dubke, former White House communications director for former President Trump. Thanks to all of you for being here, a little bleary-eyed today, so thank you for pushing through. Chuck, let me start with you. Set the stage here in terms of the fallout. I talked to a lot of allies of former President Trump who said what that statement that we just heard there should have been the beginning and end of every answer last night, and yet it came at the end of the debate.
This is the story of 9 years of Donald Trump. If only he would act not like Donald Trump, right? That's always what it is. God, if he could do this, like generic Republican, if he could do this, like, you know, a candidate that would listen to advisors. I mean, he violated every simple piece of advice that you would have been given, which is, you know, don't take the bait, don't do this. And he did. It was shockingly easy for her to do this. I don't think she, you know, I am very curious, what if he didn't do it? What was her plan B? Right? Like, you know, you know, it is one of those things. And I've actually seen that at debates where somebody comes in hoping they're going to rattle their opponent. It doesn't work and they don't have a plan B. But if she had one, she didn't obviously need to use it. But for me, the whole caution that I would throw at this, to the enthusiasm that many Harris supporters have today, is there's a chart that's been circulating. Every debate Donald Trump has participated in, he's lost by a lot except one, and that was the one in June with Joe Biden. It's clear that voters are sort of don't like what they see in the moment, but it doesn't seem to have a long-term impact. It's why I don't think Trump is going to debate, because I think it would be a huge mistake for him. This is a very good format for her. This is a very good format for her where she, you know, he likes to talk about he's a counterpuncher. A prosecutor who's been in a courtroom, they know how to be a counterpuncher. I wouldn't have a debate with her in the middle of voting, which is what the next debate could be. I say this, I'd like to see another debate as a civilian, as a, you know,
right. We welcome another debate.
But strategically, I don't know if it's a good idea for him.
Mike, what do you say about that? And then to the point that Chuck's making, that, you know, Kamala Harris had this strategy, and it worked every single time. And he knew that was going to be the strategy, by the way.
Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is where Donald Trump is because he's an unconventional politician. So we need to take that into account. And I'm glad you're pointing out all of the debates. I remember Hillary Clinton winning a debate. So
she won all three of them, if you believe the polling.
If you believe the polling. So that's where we're at. What I'd really love to say for the next 9.5 weeks, I'd love for him to talk about the last 3.5 years. Or only 8.5 weeks left for the election. But that was his best line. And why he didn't do it, I totally agree with the other Republican strategists. But at some point during the debate, Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump does, and I don't know that it matters. This wasn't a knockout. The only knockout debate I know in the last 20 years was in June.
All right, let's play a little bit of what Chuck is referencing here, some of what we heard last night from Harris.
And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. It is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
Molly, it was literally like a greatest hits of, jabs to get under his skin. And she landed. I mean, the risk in that is that you flub a line. She landed most of her attacks last night.
And to your point, and they all were successful in getting under his skin, to the point where even when the moderators gave him an opportunity to say something potentially a little bit more statesmanlike about what happened in 2020, saying, so, you have admitted recently you've made these comments about how you did actually lose the 2020 election. He's, no. Let me make clear to the American people that I still believe this lie about the rigged and stolen election. So he was sort of helping her continually. I do think, and I wrote this in my analysis for the Wall Street Journal today, that because the debate was all about Trump, it's possible that some of those swing voters that she needs to win over, those undecided voters who still don't feel like they know her well enough, that they may not have come away from this debate feeling like they got their questions about her answered. They may not come away from this debate feeling like they have a strong and clear picture of who she is in her own right versus just having seen her prosecute him, and the debate was just all about Trump.
Yeah, actually, Democrats I spoke to last night and today have said exactly that she did a great job rattling him. But at the same time, she didn't really explain some of the shifts in her policy positions in a detailed way. She didn't really say how a Harris administration would be different from a Biden administration. Does she need to spend the next several weeks doing that?
I think she actually will. And I challenge this notion that she didn't achieve what she wanted to achieve, because I think one of the most important things for her to project was a sense of command, a sense of command of the policy, presenting herself as presidential, giving people the sense that she was not going to back down to any bully, whether it's Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin. And so I think she achieved that incredibly well. Now, she'll have the next 50 days to talk about herself. But there was a line that I thought, a theme that she kept repeating all night that I think is getting lost. And she focused on the fact that Donald Trump doesn't care about you. He could care less about you. Proof point was that he showed up. This is his third attempt to be the president of the United States. He's been the head of the Republican Party for 8 years, and he shows up with no policy vision for how he's going to move the nation forward. He couldn't even come up with a plan on health care, although they voted 60 times to undermine Obamacare. I mean, so she was really effective at driving this notion that he could care less about you, and I think that's going to be a theme moving forward. And if you look at the recent CNN polls, that's the area where she's beating him double digits in these battleground states on this question of who cares about you.
Which is a great line if you have run in primaries and the American people know who you are, but she had one job other than survival last night, and that job was to define herself.
You have 50 days to do that. And the debate is not the best format to actually roll out who you are.
There were two hits that former President Trump had on her. One was the 3.5 years. The other, I thought, was when he focused on Iran and the monies. And we're playing a political game of very small margins. And when you can make the point that they made that we dried up terror funding by pulling money away from Iran, and you've got pictures of pallets of dollars being delivered during the Biden administration to Iran, that's going to be very difficult.
That was one effective line, but I will say this: what Donald Trump needed to prove is that Donald Trump cannot be Donald Trump. He needed to prove that. Every debate, as Chuck said, he's lost because he is himself. And I think he just doubled down on who Donald Trump is, and I don't think he did himself any favors.
Let me play one piece of reaction that we're getting from Senator Mitt Romney and get everyone to respond to that.
This was classic President Trump performance. In the case of Kamala Harris, most people didn't know her terribly well, other than a few clips that were not flattering that you might see on the internet, and people saw, oh, actually, she's an intelligent, capable person who has a point of view on issues, and she demonstrated that time and again.
Chuck, what about that and the fact that you've been arguing for a while the person who wins this race will be the person who proves himself to be the change candidate?
You know, one of the things that we can't underestimate, and I think Mitt Romney's making this point because he actually got into, is that first time you stand on stage with somebody who's is president or has been president, it elevates you just being on stage. And so that is an important, and that's, I think, the point he was trying to make, you know, just being on stage, being his equal in that moment. For a lot of Americans, they hadn't seen that, right? It's the first time they'd been together. Now we've seen them 2 days in a row together. But it was important for her, so I think that's a fair point.
Like
that's right.
Most of the Republicans have.
Look,
I
do think that was a look. She beat him at something that he's usually better at, which is stagecraft, right?
Yeah.
And she grabbed a piece of stagecraft. But look, I actually think she needs a second debate. Oddly enough, because I think it's the fill in the gaps. Because this was something I was talking with a colleague about today. A lot of times, you know the first thing a president's going to do if they get into office. I don't know what the first thing. I know what the first thing Trump's going to do.
She's been asked by
he's going to deport. He's going to do his deport. You know, some people may not like it, but he has talked about what he wants to do his first week.
Right.
I don't know. You know, Barack Obama made a pledge. I'm going to sign a health care law before the end of my first term. You know, we don't have it. And to Mike's point, that's usually comes out in a primary campaign. I mean, you talk to some Obama people, it's the worst. They think, like, why did he make this pledge, right? But he did it, and, you know, he got it done, right? But that's what primaries usually are about. I do think, I agree with you that a debate isn't the best place to do policy, but she needs another sort of large forum to start filling in some blanks here, because I do think there are some fence sitters there on this issue.
And guys, we're almost out of time, but rarely does Taylor Swift's name come up in this forum, but I do have to ask you, Molly.
You haven't been to my house with my daughter.
Well, that's a fair point, fair point. Does this endorsement matter?
I think so. I mean, I'm not a Swiftie, but I live with one, and she can't vote, but she would.
Does too.
But she would literally do anything Taylor Swift tells her.
My daughter
to do.
won't buy the $20 Kamala bracelet, though. She thought that was too much money. She's on a college budget. She's on a college budget.
Wasn't this, though, Plan B? This felt like Plan B to me. Like, if she did not do well at the debate, we have Taylor Swift lined up to endorse. And I have this picture of some staffer on the Harris campaign running down the hallway after she did well, saying, "Stop! Save it for next week."
All right, you guys, we're out of time. Great conversation. Thank you. There you go. Thank you so much, Chuck, Molly, Ashley, and Mike. So fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.